You ever watch months of your hard work go up in flames and realize the fire wasn't an accident? That's what happened to me last summer when Karen decided my cornfield didn't fit the HOA aesthetic. She thought burning my harvest would teach me a lesson. What she didn't know was that my property, cameras caught everything, and that the firefighters she called in panic were from my own station. I've lived in High Pines Valley all my life. Quiet, green, and peaceful, at least until the HOA moved in. They called it community development. I called it invasion. For decades, my family owned this land. 40 acres of golden cornfields stretching from the ridge to the creek. My father planted here. His father before him did too. Then came the HOA crowd, city folks with shiny SUVs and endless rules. They built pastel houses on the edge of my property and started complaining about everything. The smell of soil, the sound of tractors, even the way my rooster crowed at dawn. And leading them was Karen Stroud, self-appointed queen of High Pines HOA, blonde hair stiff as lacquer, sunglasses bigger than her sense of reason, and a voice that could pierce through steel. Karen didn't just make rules, she lived for enforcing them. It started small. Letters in my mailbox. Your fencing violates neighborhood standards. Your crops are an eyesore. Corn attracts pests. Please consider removing it. I laughed at first. My farm's been here long before their cookie-cutter homes, but Karen wasn't the type to give up. She began showing up uninvited, snapping pictures, calling code inspectors, even trying to block my farm trucks from entering the access road that ran beside her house. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, "We're just trying to elevate property values, Mr. Carter. Your agricultural activities don't exactly scream luxury." I told her flat out, "This isn't your gated suburb. Karen, you're standing on my land." But she just laughed and drove off in her shiny white SUV. Weeks passed, and the tension simmered like heat before a storm. Then came the corn harvest. Every year that time meant everything to me, and the smell of dry stalks, the golden shimmer under the sun. It's hard work, but honest work, and I'd just finished loading the first few trucks when I saw her again. Karen stood by the property line, hands on hips, watching me with that smug expression. Her friend beside her whispered something, and they both laughed. That's when I noticed it, a flyer in her hand. HOA meeting notice. Later that night, one of my neighbors, old Mr. Jenkins, once called me and said, "Carter, they're talking about you. Karen's pushing to classify your cornfield as a fire hazard. Says you're breaking safety codes." Fire hazard? On a 40-acre property that I've maintained for decades? That was no coincidence. I laughed then, but deep down, I knew she was planning something worse. 3 days later, it happened. I was out by the barn fixing the irrigation valve when I smelled smoke. Thick, bitter, unnatural. At first I thought maybe the combine's exhaust was acting up. But then I looked toward the west field and saw orange flames, and tall and wild, devouring the corn like an angry beast. The crackle echoed like snapping bones. I dropped my tools and sprinted. The heat hit me halfway there, scorching the air. My hand shook as I grabbed the extinguisher and the hose. But it was useless. The fire had already spread across half the field. The dry summer wind carried it faster than I could move. Ash filled the sky. Birds fled. The smell of burnt earth clawed at my throat. I shouted for help, but there was no one around. The HOA had banned noise after 8 p.m., and everyone had their windows shut tight. By the time the fire trucks arrived, most of my western harvest was gone. I stood there, covered in soot, my heart pounding in disbelief. One of the firefighters and a buddy of mine named Rick ran over. "You okay, man?" "Yeah, but it's bad." Rick scanned the field. Then he frowned. This wasn't random. Someone poured accelerant along the edges. Accelerant. My blood froze. He pointed to a burnt patch near the fence, and the same fence that bordered Karen's backyard. A black trail led straight to her property line. That night I barely slept. The flames still burned behind my eyes, but anger, that burned even hotter. The next morning I checked the footage from my security cameras. One camera near the old oak caught movement at 9:42 p.m. I hit play. There she was, Karen, wearing a hoodie and gloves, holding a gas can. She glanced around nervously, then poured a thin line along the dry grass. Seconds later, a spark, and then fire. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The timestamp was clear. The image was clear, and she'd done it right before calling the HOA emergency line, pretending to report a fire near the farmer's field. She said it herself. I called the sheriff's office immediately, sent them the footage. They promised to send investigators, but before they could even arrive, Karen made her next move. That afternoon, she posted in the High Pines HOA group chat. So tragic. Seems like Carter's negligence finally caught up with him. Those old farm chemicals are dangerous. Dozens of her followers replied with sympathy and blame. Poor thing. He should have maintained his land better. Maybe it's time the HOA steps in and buys him out. Buy me out. After burning my crops, I saw red, literally and figuratively, but fate works funny sometimes, because Karen didn't know who she'd really messed with. See, before I took over the family farm, I worked for the county fire department, 10 years as a field operations officer, which meant I knew every firefighter, every investigator, and every trick arsonist tried to cover their tracks. The next morning, I called Rick again. Told him everything. He didn't even hesitate. We'll handle it, Carter. Leave it to us. That evening, the same team of firefighters, the ones she'd smugly called to save her neighborhood, rolled their engines right to her driveway. Karen came out, hair perfect, pretending to be concerned. "Oh, officers, so glad you're here. We need to talk about that farmer." Rick cut her off, his expression stone cold. "Ma'am, we're actually here to talk about you." She froze. I watched from my porch as the firefighters and investigators surrounded her yard. They began collecting samples, blackened soil, melted gas residue, and pieces of fabric that matched the hoodie from the footage. Karen's fake smile faltered. Her hands trembled. She tried to deny everything, but the evidence was too clear. As the sun set over the valley, I stood there, soot still on my boots, but a calm satisfaction in my chest. The golden fields might have turned to ash, but justice was already catching fire in its own way. And this was just the beginning. Because when the sheriff's report came in, and Karen realized the full cost of what she'd done, she was about to learn what real panic felt like. The next morning, the valley was eerily quiet. Ash still floated in the air, and the smell of burnt corn hung heavy over everything. I stood by the wreckage of my harvest, boots sinking into the blackened soil. Where golden stalks once swayed, there was nothing but ruin. And yet, I wasn't broken, because I knew deep down this wasn't the end. This was evidence. Rick showed up just after sunrise, clipboard in hand and a tired look in his eyes. "Morning, Carter," he said. "We've got confirmation from the lab. The residue from her fence line matches gasoline compounds. Pure accelerant." I nodded slowly, jaw tight. "So she did it," he sighed. "Looks that way, but it's not enough yet. We need to build the case airtight. No loopholes, no HOA lawyer tricks." I looked toward the row of identical houses across the creek, all pastel colors, perfect lawns, fake smiles. That was Karen's world. And if I'd learned one thing about people like her, it's that they fight dirty. So I decided to fight smarter. That day I drove into town and met with Deputy Ramos, an old friend from my firefighting days. Ramos wasn't just a cop. He was a tracker, an investigator, the kind who didn't mind getting his hands dirty for the truth. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So this HOA lady torches your field, then tries to pin it on you?" "Exactly," I said, sliding him a USB drive with the footage. He plugged it in, watched for maybe 30 seconds, then muttered, "Damn, she didn't even try to hide it." Ramos looked up at me. "You want my honest advice? Don't just take this to the sheriff. Go to the county fire marshal. Let the investigation go federal. Arson on agricultural property. That's not a fine, that's a felony." I smiled for the first time in days. "Then let's light her world up legally." By that evening, the whole valley buzzed with whispers. People saw the fire trucks at her door, and rumors spread faster than smoke. Some said Karen was arrested. Others said she fainted. Truth was, she was panicking. I saw her SUV drive by my property 3 times that day. She didn't stop. She didn't even roll down her window. Just stared at me through her dark glasses, pale, nervous, like someone who realized their match had lit the wrong thing. 2 days later, the county marshal's office arrived. A team of specialists, investigators, and one very serious-looking woman named Agent Monroe. She introduced herself with a handshake firm enough to crack knuckles. Mr. Carter, I've reviewed your footage. We're pursuing a formal arson investigation. I'll need access to your property and your permission to question the HOA residents. I couldn't help but grin. Be my guest. You'll find plenty of people who know Karen's brand of crazy. She smirked. We already have. That evening, Karen's perfect facade started collapsing. The HOA chat group, usually her stage for control, exploded with panic. Karen, are the investigators really from the county? Did you start the fire? We trusted you to represent us. She tried to calm them down, typing fast. This is all a misunderstanding. That farmer edited the video. He's just trying to frame me. But when someone asked, then why did they find accelerant behind your fence? She went silent. And in HOA language, silence was as good as confession. I spent the next few days rebuilding what I could. Neighbors who once avoided me now waved from their driveways, awkwardly sympathetic. Funny how disaster changes people. Even old Mrs. Parker, who once complained about my tractor noise, brought over a pie. I never liked that woman, she whispered. She acts like she owns the sun. I laughed. But deep down, I was still angry. Not just at Karen, but at the system that let people like her destroy and manipulate others in the name of community standards. So, I decided to hit her where it hurt the most. The HOA board. Every HOA meeting was supposed to be open to all members of the community. And since my land technically bordered the neighborhood, I had every right to attend, so I walked in. The air went cold. Karen sat at the head of the long oak table trying to pretend everything was normal. Her hair was pulled tight, her smile tighter. The other members avoided her eyes. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the projector, and hit play. The footage appeared on the screen, grainy night vision of her pouring gasoline. The spark. The flames. Her face gasps filled the room. Karen went white as chalk. This, I said calmly, is what happens when someone mistakes power for ownership. You burned my field, Karen. You burned the land that fed half this valley. She tried to stammer, That's edited. That's not, but one of the members stood up. Karen, that's your yard. That's your fence. You can see your patio lights in the corner. Another voice. She said he started it. Karen, you lied to us. And just like that, her empire cracked. When the meeting ended, she tried to follow me out to talk privately. I stopped at the door and looked back. No, Karen, we're done talking. You'll be hearing from the county attorney instead. Her eyes widened. For the first time, not with arrogance, but fear. She realized this wasn't a petty feud anymore. This was a criminal case. That night, rain finally came. It fell hard, washing the ashes into the soil. I stood on the porch, letting the water hit my face. Maybe it was symbolic, cleansing, renewal. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. Because people like Karen never go quietly. And when they're cornered, they lash out harder. Sure enough, the next morning I woke up to chaos. My mailbox was ripped out. My tires slashed. And on the side of my barn, someone had spray painted, "Farmer Fraud." I didn't need a detective to know who did it. Karen had gone from desperate to dangerous. I called Rick again, voice calm but cold. She's escalating. I need surveillance, full coverage. He agreed. They set up hidden cameras around my property, ready for her next move. Meanwhile, Agent Monroe called me with updates. They'd found fingerprints on the gas can. Partial, but enough for a match. Karen's prints. She paused before adding, "She's trying to hire a lawyer and spin this as an accident. Said she was trying to clear weeds and it got out of hand." I chuckled. Weeds on a moonless night wearing gloves and a hoodie? Monroe smiled faintly. "We'll let the jury decide." Days passed. Karen avoided me, but her house stayed lit at all hours. People said she hadn't been sleeping. Her husband, if you could call him that, was seen loading suitcases into his car. The HOA's vice president resigned. The community newsletter stopped printing. High Pines, the so-called model neighborhood mine, was falling apart under her leadership, and I hadn't even lifted a finger. Then came the hearing notice. Official and bold. State versus Karen Stroud. Arson, property damage, false reporting. Rick dropped it off personally. "Looks like it's official now," he said. "You're testifying, right?" I nodded. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he smirked. "You think she'll plead guilty?" I looked out toward the blackened fields where new shoots were just starting to grow through the ash. "No," I said quietly. "People like her never admit they're wrong. They need the whole world to prove it to them." That night, as the moon rose over High Pines, I walked the edge of my land one last time before the trial. The air was still. The fire scars were fading, replaced by the green of rebirth. But behind me, across the property line, Karen's porch light flickered. On, off, on. Like a heartbeat. Or a warning, because when the sheriff's report came in, and Karen realized the full cost of what she'd done, she was about to learn what real panic felt like. The courthouse in Summit County sat like an old relic. Sandstone walls, iron gates, and a quietness that made you feel small. But on the morning of State versus Karen Stroud, that quietness was gone. News vans lined the street. Reporters stood on the steps, microphones ready. Apparently, HOA president accused of arson made for great headlines. I pulled my hat low, trying to ignore the cameras. This wasn't about fame or revenge. It was about justice and closure. Inside, Karen sat at the defense table, dressed in gray, her hair dull and lifeless. No pearls, no sunglasses, no forced smile. Her lawyer, some slick guy from the city, whispered in her ear while she fidgeted with her hands. Across the aisle sat Agent Monroe, Deputy Ramos, and Rick from the fire department. The people who'd seen through every layer of her deceit. And me, sitting behind them, silent, watching. The judge, Honneur Margaret Hill, entered and took her seat. Court is now in session. We'll begin with opening statements. The prosecutor, a calm, sharp woman named Diane Porter, stood first. She looked at the jury and began, "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't just about property. It's about intent, a deliberate act meant to destroy and deceive. The defendant, Karen Stroud, torched a working farm for personal gain. She endangered lives, lied to authorities, and tried to shift blame onto an innocent man. Today we'll show you evidence, footage, and testimony proving that." Then she turned, pointed toward me briefly, and added, "The victim of this crime didn't seek vengeance. He sought justice. And justice starts here." When it was the defense's turn, Karen's lawyer smirked and began spinning a web. My client was attempting to clear dry weeds near her fence. The fire spread by accident due to wind conditions. She panicked and called emergency services immediately. He gestured toward me. "Mr. Carter, while sympathetic, has had ongoing disputes with the HOA. His footage, while compelling, is not conclusive evidence of intent." Karen nodded along, eyes darting to the jury as if begging for understanding. But the jury wasn't buying it, not with the tension in the room so thick you could hear every breath. Then came the evidence. Agent Monroe took the stand first. We recovered traces of gasoline on both the defendant's property line and the burned field. The chemical signature matches the fuel brand stored in Mrs. Stroud's garage. She paused, then displayed a photograph. We also found partially burned gloves in a bin behind her home. The fingerprints matched. Karen's lawyer objected, muttering something about chain of custody. Overruled. Then came the footage, the same one I'd shown at the HOA meeting. It played on a large monitor for everyone to see. The moment the spark ignited, the courtroom gasped. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Karen sank into her chair, face pale. No words. No excuses. Just guilt. Finally, it was my turn. The bailiff swore me in. I walked to the stand and looked at the jury. "I've lived on that land my whole life," I began. "My father built that farm. My son was supposed to take it over one day. That field wasn't just corn, it was heritage. And she tried to burn it away because it didn't fit her idea of what belongs." I turned toward Karen. She didn't just destroy crops. She destroyed trust. She made a community afraid of honesty. The prosecutor asked softly, "Mr. Carter, did you ever threaten Mrs. Stroud?" I shook my head. "No, ma'am. I just asked her to stay off my property." "That's all," she nodded. "And did you recognize the person in the footage?" I looked straight at Karen. "Yes, without a doubt." When I stepped down, Karen's lawyer tried to shake things up, claiming the footage could be deep-faked. But Agent Monroe shot that down immediately. We analyzed the video metadata, compression signatures, and timestamps. "It's authentic, not altered." He tried again, claiming I had motive to frame her. Monroe raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting a man would destroy his own harvest worth over $80,000 to frame an HOA president?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge smirked. The defense fell silent. Over the next few days, witnesses testified, neighbors, HOA members, even her vice president. Each one told a similar story. Karen ran the HOA like a kingdom. She threatened fines for everything. She said she'd get rid of that farm eyesore. One way or another, the narrative built itself. Piece by piece, her mask came off. When it was finally her turn to testify, the tension could have shattered glass. Karen walked to the stand, avoiding everyone's eyes. Her voice trembled at first. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted the neighborhood to be beautiful. The prosecutor stepped forward. By setting fire to private property? Karen stammered. I thought it was weeds. On a moonless night in gloves and a hoodie? Karen blinked rapidly, her composure cracking. I was trying to fix things before the HOA inspection. By committing arson? Karen broke down, sobbing loudly, her tears falling onto the microphone. The courtroom stayed silent except for her shaky breathing. When closing arguments began, the prosecutor's words hit like hammer blows. This wasn't a mistake. This was arrogance. Mrs. Stroud thought rules made her untouchable. But no one, not even an HOA president, is above the law. Then finally the jury left to deliberate. Minutes stretched into hours. I sat there, fingers interlocked, staring at the floor. By sunset, the bailiff called everyone back. The jury filed in, solemn. The foreman stood and said, "We find the defendant, Karen Stroud, guilty on all counts." My chest tightened, not with anger but with relief. The kind of relief that feels like a storm breaking after months of drought. Karen went pale. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't move. The judge spoke. "Mrs. Stroud, you are hereby convicted of first-degree arson, property destruction, and false reporting. You will serve a sentence of 5 years with probation and restitution to the victim. 5 years, not forever, but enough for reflection." When the gavel struck, it was over. Karen was escorted out in handcuffs, mascara streaked, shoulders slumped. A far cry from the Queen of High Pines. Outside, reporters swarmed, asking me for comments. I gave them one simple line. This isn't about revenge. It's about rebuilding what's right. Then I got in my truck and drove home. The valley looked different that evening. The fire scars were healing. The air felt lighter. And for the first time in a long time, High Pines was quiet. Truly quiet. But there was one more thing I needed to do. Something my father always said. Don't let hate take root where you plant hope. So I grabbed a shovel, walked to the edge of the burnt field, and started planting again. Row by row, seed by seed, not just corn, but resilience. Weeks passed. Karen's house went up for sale. The HOA dissolved. No one wanted the title anymore. The people who once followed her started helping each other instead. Rick and Ramos visited often, sharing stories and helping with the rebuild. Even the kids from the neighborhood came to volunteer, laughing and running through the fields. Life, real life, was returning. But one day, as I locked up the barn, I found a letter tucked under the door. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single page, handwritten in shaky cursive. I'm sorry. I lost myself trying to control everything. You were right. The land was never the problem. I was. Karen, I stood there for a long time, the wind rustling through the half-grown stalks. Maybe she'd finally learned something. Or maybe she just needed to unburden her guilt. Either way, I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket, because even ashes have stories to tell. As the sun dipped behind the hills, I looked across the valley. Where there was once smoke and ruin, there was now light and promise. Justice had been served. But peace was something I had to grow myself, because when the sheriff's report came in, and Karen realized the full cost of what she'd done, she was about to learn what real panic felt like. Summer returned to High Pines Valley, but it wasn't the same valley anymore. The air was cleaner, the nights quieter. Where charred soil once lay, green shoots now stretched toward the sky. Stubborn, alive, defiant. My cornfield was coming back to life row by row like it refused to die. And in a way, so did I. Karen's trial had ended 2 months ago. She was serving her time at a low-security facility outside county lines. The HOA she ruled like an empire, gone, dissolved. Every member had resigned or sold their home. For the first time in years, I could drive down the valley road without seeing HOA notice signs nailed to fence posts. Just peace. the kind I hadn't known since before they arrived. But peace, I learned, doesn't just appear. You have to make room for it. So I did something unexpected. I invited the very community that once sided with her, the homeowners, the families, to my land. Not to argue, not to accuse. To rebuild. We called it the Harvest Renewal Project. Every Saturday, neighbors came with tools, gloves, and smiles that didn't look forced anymore. Kids helped plant. Mothers brought food. Fathers repaired fences and irrigation lines. The valley that once divided itself along an invisible HOA line was now united by sweat and soil. Even their houses looked different, less sterile, more lived in. Lawns had toys, gardens, color. Real life had finally moved back in. One evening, as I leaned on the old gate watching the sun sink low, Rick joined me. He tossed me a bottle of root beer and grinned. "You ever think you'd see this place alive again?" I smiled. "Honestly? No, not after what she did." He nodded, quiet for a moment, then said, "A funny thing, Carter, sometimes you gotta burn the weeds to see what's worth keeping." I looked across the fields, the new corn swaying golden under the evening light, and realized he was right. A few weeks later, I got a call from Agent Monroe. "Carter, thought you should know. Karen's been doing well in rehab programs. She's paying restitution on schedule. She asked if I'd tell you thank you for not fighting for a harsher sentence." I didn't know what to say for a moment. Finally, I just asked, "She mean it?" Monroe chuckled softly. "I think so. People change. Sometimes when it's too late, sometimes just in time." I hung up and stared out at the horizon, the golden light painting everything soft and new. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just acceptance. That night, I pulled out her letter again, the one she'd left under my barn door. The ink had smudged a little, maybe from my hands, maybe from the weather. But the words still carried the same weight. The land was never the problem, I was. I folded it carefully and slipped it back into the same box where I kept my father's journal. Some things you keep, not to remember the pain, but the lesson. The valley healed faster than I expected. By midsummer, the corn grew taller than the fence posts. Bees returned. Birds sang. Even the creek, once choked with soot, ran clear again. Every time I drove by, I thought of my father's voice. "Land remembers how you treat it, son. Treat it right and it'll forgive you." He was right. The land forgave us, even when we didn't deserve it. Then came the Harvest Festival, our first one in years. We held it right in the middle of the cornfield. Bonfires, safe, supervised ones this time, food stalls, music, laughter echoing through the hills. Families danced. Children chased fireflies, and for a night, the valley felt whole again. Near the end of the evening, the mayor walked up to the mic and announced something that made the crowd cheer. "We're officially designating this valley as an agricultural heritage zone, protected from future HOA development." That moment hit me harder than I expected, not just because it meant my land was safe, but because it meant my father's dream was safe too. Later, as the crowd thinned and the fires burned low, I sat on the tailgate of my old truck just watching the stars. Rick came over, clapping me on the shoulder. "Guess you won after all, huh?" I chuckled. "Nah, I just stopped losing," he laughed. "You gonna rebuild the west barn next?" "Already planning it," I said. "And maybe a new irrigation system too. Something Karen can't set on fire." We both laughed. The kind of laugh that comes easy after a long storm finally ends. A month later, I got another letter. This one official. It was from the state restitution office. Karen had paid her first installment, compensation for the damages. It wasn't about the money. It was the principle. Attached was a handwritten note, smaller than before, but just as sincere. "If you ever plant sunflowers again, plant one for me." For a while, I stared at that line, unsure how to feel. Then I smiled. Because forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just stops it from owning you. So I did. Next to the corn rows, I planted a patch of bright yellow sunflowers. By late August, they stood tall and proud. Their faces turned toward the same sun that once lit the flames she'd started. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The same heat that destroys can also grow something beautiful, if you let it. One morning, a news crew stopped by. They'd heard about the farm's rebirth, the HOA's collapse, and the town's new community projects. They wanted to film a short feature called From Ashes to Acres. At first, I said no. But then I thought, maybe this story isn't just mine anymore. Maybe it belongs to everyone who's ever had something destroyed and still found the strength to rebuild. So I agreed. When the cameras rolled, they asked, "Mr. Carter, what message would you give to people dealing with injustice like yours?" I thought for a second, then said, "Don't fight fire with fire. Fight it with truth, because the truth burns longer and it leaves light, not ashes." When the feature aired, messages poured in. Farmers, homeowners, small business owners, people from across the country who'd faced bullies, corrupt HOAs, or unfair systems. They said the story gave them hope, and maybe that's what all of this was really about. Not revenge, not punishment. Hope. By the end of that year, High Pines wasn't just a place again, it was a community. The old HOA lot was turned into a public garden. Kids from the local school visited to learn about farming and fire safety. Rick even started a volunteer fire education program for rural families. And me? I just kept planting. Corn, sunflowers, sometimes even wheat. Because that's what I do best. And because the land still listens. On the anniversary of the fire, I drove out to the far west field. The same place where the flames had first risen. The same place where Karen's shadow once stood, holding a gas can. Only this time, the field was alive. Bright gold under the sun. I stood there feeling the wind move through the stalks, carrying whispers of the past and promises of tomorrow, and for the first time since it all began. I felt peace because when the sheriff's report came in, and Karen realized the full cost of what she'd done, she was about to learn what real panic felt like.